Good evening everyone, welcome to Smarter Insights by Bajirao Ias Academy, and today we have some important mains questions from General Studies paper 3, and one by one we'll be discussing all these important questions in a very detailed manner. And in this particular session we'll be discussing the structure presentation of the answers and how to write a very good answer so that you can score a good marks in each of these questions. Now, first question is about mineral resources of India. Now, mineral resources are fundamental to country's economy and these are exploited by mining. Why is mining considered an environmental hazard? And explain the remedial measures required to reduce environmental hazard due to mining. So, in fact, if you look at this particular question, this has three parts. The first part says that mineral resources are fundamental to the country's economy and they are exploited by mining. And in fact, in this answer, it is better if you have drawn a diagram, a map of India, and have shown the mineral resources which are located, which are distributed across the country in the first part of the answer. And then you need to write why mining is considered as an environmental hazard. This is the second part of the question. And then you need to write some remedial measures, and these remedial measures are required to reduce the environmental hazard that is being caused by mining. So I hope you have understood three parts of the question. And in the introduction, so you just mention the importance of mineral resources for economic growth. Now, how important the mineral resources are for country's economic growth and economic development, you just stress this in the introduction. And in the body part of the answer, so as this question has three parts, so you need to address these three parts with adequate data and examples. And in the conclusion, you should also write the remedial measures, because mining is generally considered as an environmental hazard. So therefore, in this context, you need to suggest the remedial measures also. For example, there is a need to enforce strict regulations by the government, by the Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Boards. And apart from that, when you are exploiting or extracting the mineral resources, adopt eco-friendly technologies. And apart from that, the focus should be on land reclamation, promotion of afforestation, because mining very often leads to the deforestation in the mined areas. And most importantly, community involvement, community engagement is also a very important aspect that has to be focused on when we are discussing about the remedial measures for the mining, or because mining is an environmental hazard. Now, first in the introduction, as I've already told you, that you just briefly introduce mining and its importance for economic growth. Now, in fact, when you extract the mineral resources usually helpful for us as a raw material. So therefore, it will help in the industrial growth, infrastructure development, energy generation. So therefore, mineral resources are very, very important for the economy of any country. Particularly for India, mineral resources play a very important role. However, now when we are mining, when we are extracting the mineral resources, so it is obvious that it poses significant environmental dangers or significant environmental hazards as well. So therefore, it actually undermines the ecological sustainability and human health, because as of now, if we extract the mineral resources due to the poor technologies, outdated technologies, the extraction of mineral resources would result in undermining the ecological sustainability and human health, because mining or extraction of the mineral resources leads to the deforestation, right? So apart from that, it also affects the human health as well. Now, this is how you need to write introduction for this question in a very brief way. And then you need to mention why mining is an environmental hazard, right? So this is obviously the second part of the answer, but in this particular question, it is better if you draw a map and if you show the mineral resources which are distributed all across the country. Now, why mining is an environmental hazard? So firstly, it will lead to the land degradation. It is very obvious fact, because when we are mining, it leads to a large scale deforestation and soil erosion in that particular place. Now, in fact, deforestation will have other environmental hazards. For example, deforestation leads to the flash flooding or flooding, right? So it very often leads to floods. And apart from that, deforestation also leads to other disasters like landslides. And apart from that, the deforestation or soil erosion would make the land unsuitable for agriculture. So land will not be suitable for the agriculture if soil erosion has been taking place, right? So therefore, the open cast mining causes both deforestation and soil erosion as well. Now, as an example, you can mention coal mining in Jharkhand. So this coal mining in Jharkhand led to the loss of forest cover and agricultural land, because a frequent soil erosion leads to declining fertility rates. It leads to declining fertility rates. Now, declining fertility rate translates to the loss of agriculture land. And then we need to talk about the water pollution, because when we are mining in a particular area, so during mining, they also release heavy metals. These heavy metals and acidic effluents are being released, and they contaminate the closed water bodies, right? So contamination of water bodies with heavy metals. Now, further contamination of water bodies would further leads to bioaugmentation, and it further leads to bioaccumulation as well, and developing of algal blooms would also be developed, right? So therefore, if you talk about the water pollution, as per the Central Pollution Control Board, mining alone contributes to 30% of the heavy metal pollution in Indian rivers. Because generally what happens is, whenever mining takes place, due to mining, heavy metals and acidic effluents are contaminating the nearby water bodies. And contamination of nearby water bodies in the mining also leads to the contamination of rivers as well, right? So therefore, mining alone contributes to 30% heavy metal pollution in Indian rivers. So it is a major cause of polluting the rivers. And in fact, mining also contributes to air pollution as well, because when we are mining, it releases dust and other emissions. Now, in fact, the dust and other emissions, because of mining, transportation, it will lead to the respiratory issues as well, right? Because it also releases particulate matter 2.5, particulate matter 10 as well. So they could be easily absorbed inside the human body, causing health related problems. For example, Bellary iron ore mines, which are located in the state of Karnataka. And in fact, the Bellary iron ore mines saw PM10 levels far above the safer limits. So therefore, the air pollution is also one of the major cause, or one of the major consequence of mining. And then it will also lead to the biodiversity loss as well, because when mining leads to the deforestation, and deforestation also causes biodiversity loss, because mining, if it is carried out in an ecologically sensitive area or sensitive zones, that very often threaten the flora and fauna as well, because it disturbs the local ecosystem, disturbs the local ecology and ecosystem. It leads to deforestation, and disturbing local flora and fauna would further cause the loss of biodiversity, right? So therefore, it also causes the ecological damage in this way. For example, Western Ghats are generally known for endemic species. What are the endemic species? Any species which are specifically found in a particular area. which is the endemic nature of plants or animals. For example, Nilgiri Thar, which is an endemic species to the Western Ghats. Mining in Western Ghats affect the endemic species and wildlife corridors. So therefore, mining would also lead to the biodiversity loss, and then groundwater depletion as well. So groundwater depletion is also another major factor because of mining. Over extraction of water for mineral processing, it reduces the availability of water table, because as we have discussed that mining leads to the deforestation. Now if large scale deforestation takes place, the percolation of water or seepage of water into the aquifers will decrease. So it will decrease, and that will further decrease the groundwater tables as well. So overall, there will be a reduction of the groundwater, reduction or decline of the groundwater tables, and it would create the water stress as well. Now in fact, India as a country, because of its unsustainable water management practices, almost like 30 to 40% of the people have been facing this water stress or water crisis. However, mining also causes the groundwater depletion, and groundwater depletion will further increase the water scarcity or water stress in India. Now one example is mining areas in Odisha report 10 to 15% annual groundwater decline. So further decline in the groundwater will create a large scale water stress throughout India. And then we need to talk about the remedial measures. And if we talk about the remedial measures, firstly, there is a need for a strict environmental impact assessment before carrying out mining. Before carrying out mining, there is a need for environmental impact assessment. So stringent or strict penalties should be imposed if mining is carried out without the environmental impact assessment. Now, this environmental impact assessment generally assesses the impact of mining on the environment. Once a project is carried out, once mining is carried out, the damage caused by the mining to the ecology and ecosystem, the damage caused by the mining to the ecology and ecosystem, whether the ecology can recover, right? Whether the forest or the ecology could recover even after mining is being carried out, this project is carried out. Now in fact, this particular project, for example project A, mining project A, if this project has a high degree of impact on the environment, right? So it leads to large scale deforestation, and it also leads to the large scale biodiversity loss in that area, and it causes land degradation. And it may emerge as a threat to the livelihood security of the people in that particular area, living in that area. So in that context, the environmental impact assessment strictly says no to the project A. So therefore, it is very important to carry out environmental impact assessment. And then there is a need for carrying out sustainable mining practices. Now sustainable mining practices usually involves the closed loop water systems and eco-friendly technologies. But the problem with the eco-friendly technologies or closed loop water systems is that they are expensive. They are not cost effective in nature, right? So therefore, there is a need for gradual adoption of eco-friendly technologies when it comes to mining, because we knew that how mining is very important for any country, particularly a country like India, because it helps in industrial growth and development, and it also helps in infrastructure development. So overall, it contributes to economic growth and development. So because of this particular reason, even if it is expensive in the beginning, initially, there is a need to adopt eco-friendly technologies for mining and closed loop water systems as well. And then we need to talk about the reforestation and land reclamation, because mining causes what? Mining very often causes deforestation. So therefore, there is a need for afforestation in that mined area, and apart from that there should be efforts for the land reclamation as well through afforestation methods. So there is a need to turn these zones into green zones through afforestation methods. And we should also involve community, because community can actually play a very important role. So therefore the community should be recognized as an important stakeholder in this process. For example, afforestation, land reclamation, environmental impact assessment, restoration of the sustainable nature of the forest. So for all these purposes, communities should be involved, communities should be linked during planning and monitoring. And apart from that, strengthening the monitoring mechanisms is also very important. So there should be institutional monitoring on practices like afforestation, land reclamation, environmental impact assessment, and even for these monitoring mechanisms also there should be an active community participation as well. For example, the GIS can be effectively used for monitoring and also remote sensing. So it will result in real-time monitoring of the mining activities. So these are the remedial measures that you could write in the answer. And if you have any examples, if you have any best case studies, you can also add those case studies and examples along with these remedial measures. And ultimately, when you write the conclusion for this answer, you just have to mention that mining drives economic development, right? So mining, because mining would contribute to industrial growth, mining would contribute to infrastructure development, economic growth and economic development. But along with that, it also contributes to the environmental risks as well. So what we should emphasize on here, there is a need for a balanced development. There is a need for the balanced development. Now, in this balanced development, we are balancing the need for economic growth and also environmental sustainability. So for that to happen, so there is a need to adopt sustainable mining practices. For example, adoption of eco-friendly technologies, closed loop water systems, and there is a need for robust regulation by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Central Pollution Control Board, State Pollution Control Board, and all these agencies should closely monitor and regulate the activities of mining. And apart from that, there is a need for community engagement, community participation. So this will help secure long-term ecological and economic sustainability in mining. So this is how you need to write a comprehensive and holistic answer in this particular question. Now next very important question, it is about India's climate commitments. India as a responsible country announced certain climate commitments during Paris Agreement of 2015, which is also known as COP21, Conference of Party 21. India announced its climate commitments as a responsible nation. And apart from that, during COP27 Glasgow Summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced Panchamrit commitments as well. So we'll be discussing the Panchamrit commitments and India's climate commitments as well. Now in this context, mention how these have been further strengthened COP26 in 2021, and in this direction, how has the first nationally determined contribution, NDCs, nationally determined contributions are known as NDCs, which are intended by India, have been updated in the year 2022, right? For example, so NDCs are intended nationally determined contributions to minimize climate change, to mitigate climate change, worst effects of the climate change, and reducing the global warming. Now we all knew that COP21 Paris climate deal, the overall objective was to reduce the global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius, or if it is possible below 1.5 degree Celsius. Right, this is the objective of COP21. right? So therefore, India announced its nationally determined contributions, India announced its climate commitments, and India also announced Panchamrit goals as well. So first, let's understand the introduction for this question. Now, in the introduction, you just mentioned that India committed to climate action under Paris Agreement of 2015. So India's climate commitments essentially deal with emission reduction and clean energy goals. And then you need to talk about the Panchamrit strategy that has been announced by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in COP27. Right? So COP26, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the Panchamrit strategy in COP26. And as part of the Panchamrit strategy, net zero, India aimed to become net zero by the year 2070, and in 2022 India updated its nationally determined contribution, raising targets for non-fossil energy use and emission intensity reduction. So you have to link both Panchamrit commitments and also India's climate commitments announced as part of the Paris Agreement of 2015. And in the conclusion of this answer, India's commitment reflect enhanced ambition while balancing development and climate responsibility. Right? So India is a developing country. So development of India is a very important. Now, along with the development, it is also very important that India need to have a certain commitments to reduce or mitigate climate change and reduce global warming. Now, in the introduction of this answer, so firstly, you need to briefly talk about India's Paris Agreement of 2015 and India's commitments, right? So India is a very important stakeholder in the global climate change regime because India is the third largest emitter of the greenhouse gases, third largest consumer of the fossil fuels as well. So therefore, in this context, India is a very, very important stakeholder in the global climate change regime that we should understand. And in fact, India already ratified Paris Agreement of 2015, which is also known as COP21. And in fact, the objective of COP21 Paris Agreement is to reduce the global temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius. Right? So there should not be a 2 degrees Celsius increase in the global temperatures compared to the pre-industrial levels. However, the target is to, if possible, achieve the increase of the global temperatures just 1.5 degree Celsius of pre-industrial levels. However, since the Paris Climate Deal, India's climate goals have evolved, notably at COP26 at the Glasgow Summit. And in this COP26 of the Glasgow Summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the Panchamrit commitments. And these Panchamrit commitments are updated first nationally determined contributions in 2022. So let's understand what are these Panchamrit commitments and what are India's climate commitments. Now, the objective is to reduce global warming and also reducing increase in the global temperatures. Let's understand India's commitments under the Paris Agreement of 2015. So firstly, India aimed at emission intensity reduction. Because India, as a responsible stakeholder in global climate change regime, India pledged to reduce emission intensity of its GDP by 33 to 35% compared to 2005 levels by the year 2030. So therefore, overall emission intensity of India's economy will be substantially reduced as part of India's commitments under the Paris Agreement. And then the non-fossil fuel capacity will also be substantially increased. So India will no longer substantially or excessively dependent on fossil fuels, because when we burn fossil fuels, they emit the greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases further cause global warming and climate change. So therefore, India committed to achieve about 40% cumulative installed electric power capacity from the non-fossil fuel based energy resources. and this goal will be achieved by the year 2030. However, if we talk about the non-fossil fuel based electric power generation, the power will be generated through hydroelectricity and wind, solar, and other means. And then India will also create a carbon sink as well, right? So if we talk about the carbon sink, afforestation. So India aimed to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2, which is equivalent to forest and tree cover by the 2030. So through afforestation drive, India will create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons. So all these measures on the part of India will result in India becoming a net zero, India reducing its dependence on fossil fuels, India also reducing the carbon intensive nature of its economy. For example, the installed non-fossil capacity share has crossed 40% ahead of schedule, and emission intensity has further declined significantly. Now, what is this emission intensity? For example, industrial emissions, vehicular emissions, and emissions from all different sectors. So the emissions primarily consist of the greenhouse gases. So therefore, the objective is to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So therefore, in order to reduce the emissions into the atmosphere, we should dependent on renewable form of energy and non-fossil fuel sources of energy. So that's how we could reduce the emission intensity of our economy. And then how these commitments have further strengthened at COP26 Glasgow 2021 summit. Now in this summit, India announced a set of Panchamrit commitments. And if we talk about the Panchamrit commitments in a specific way, the first target is increase in non-fossil fuel electricity capacity by 500 gigawatt by the year 2030. This is the first goal. And then we will meet 50% of our energy requirements from renewable sources by the year 2030. And then we will reduce the carbon intensity of our economy by 1 billion ton from now till 2030. This is the third goal, and cut emission intensity of GDP to 45% by 2030. So we'll reduce the carbon intensity of our economy, emission intensity of our economy or GDP by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2070. India will become net zero by 2070. Now what is this net zero? Net zero is a balance between the total emissions and the absorption of all the emissions, right? So whatever emissions a country generates, the total amount of emissions would be absorbed through various means, which is called as the net zero. The balance between emissions and its absorption capacity is considered as net zero. So we'll become net zero by the year 2070. Right? So these are 5 goals as part of the Glasgow commitments or Panchamrit commitments announced by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Glasgow Summit of 2021. So therefore, these announcements have marked a significant upward revision of India's ambitions, India's climate goals compared to the 2015 nationally determined contributions. So therefore, it reflects the responsible role of India in global climate change regime. As a developing country, India becoming net zero by the year 2070 is not an easy task. But despite that, India announced that it will become net zero by the year 2070. It reflects India's climate commitment. And in fact, the update of India's first NDC in 2022, if we talk about this, in August 2022, India formally submitted its updated nationally determined contribution to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So therefore, it reflects the Conference of Parties 26 commitments, which are also called as Panchamrit commitments on the part of India. So let's understand the revised targets. So if we talk about the revised targets, the emission intensity of India's GDP, so it will be enhanced from 33 to 35% earlier target to 45% reduction by the year 2030. And the cumulative installed electric power capacity, and this electric power capacity from the non-fossil fuel based resources, and it will be enhanced from 40% to 50% by the year 2030. And some additional features also, for example, the greater stress is on the sustainable lifestyle under lifestyle for environment initiative, right? So as part of the lifestyle for environment initiative, the main focus will be on adaptation measures, aligning development with the climate justice. Now, in the conclusion of this answer, again, you need to emphasize on the need for balanced development that balances economic growth development with the environmental sustainability and India's goals and commitments towards the climate change as well. So therefore, India's climate commitments, they moved from cautious pledge in 2015 to a more ambitious and globally visible posture by 21-22. And in fact, it also strengthened targets at COP26 and updated nationally determined contributions. So therefore, it demonstrates India's willingness to raise its ambition while retaining its developmental imperatives as well. Now, in a nutshell, you need to emphasize on the need for balanced development that keeps in mind both environmental sustainability and the need for economic growth and economic development as well. And next question is about the internal security, because internal security is a very important topic in Gender Studies paper 3. So it is being said that what are the major challenges to internal security and peace process in northeastern states, because northeastern states have been facing certain internal security challenges. So in the first part of the answer, you need to write what are the major challenges to internal security and peace process in northeastern states, and then in the second part of the answer, map various peace accords and agreements which are initiated by the government in the past decade. Now in the model framework in the introduction, so you just mention northeastern part of India and its strategic importance, and how northeastern part of India has been facing various internal security challenges. You just briefly mention that in the introduction, and in the body part of the answer, mention some key issues including insurgency, ethnic tensions, border disputes, weak governance. So you need to mention all these issues. And apart from that, the peace accords that the government has signed in the past decade and the current decade, like Bodo, Bruriang, Karbi, United Liberation Front of Assam agreements, right? So to shed violence and adopt a peace path, so therefore it will result in peace in northeastern part of India, order. So ultimately, in the conclusion, you could suggest some measures that have to be adopted, security measures, developmental measures, so where the communities should be involved. So you need to mention some measures as well, and there is a need for focus on better implementation of the existing peace accords. Focus should be on development and inclusive dialogue with all the stakeholders which have involved. So therefore, it will result in the inclusive development, right? So in the introduction of this particular question, what you have to write, right? So in the introduction, the 8 states of India's northeastern region, they are lying between international borders and complex terrain, and in fact it has long faced multifaceted internal security challenges, right? So it has faced a lot of internal security challenges because northeastern part of India, it shares its borders with China, Myanmar and Bangladesh. So because of all these reasons, the northeastern part of India, so apart from that, it also has a complex terrain, hilly, difficult terrain. Because of these reasons, and ethnicity is also ethnic diversity, right? So ethnic diversity is also another major factor. Because of all these factors, it has long faced a multifaceted internal security challenges. However, concurrently, the government has advanced multiple peace accords and agreements over the past decade. So these things will help stabilize the region and also integrate the erstwhile insurgents. So in fact, we need to write about the key challenges and then map the major peace initiatives since 2014 between the armed groups and also the government of India. Now, in the body part of the answer, first you need to mention the major challenges to internal security and peace process. Firstly, you need to talk about multiplicity of insurgent groups and complex demands. Now, in fact, there are multiple number of militant organizations, right? So these extremist groups in the northeastern part of India with various objectives, right? So north is generally known for insurgency. It is generally known for insurgency, right? So therefore, there are numerous militant organizations that they operate in the northeastern part of India, often with overlapping or competing agendas. For example, United Liberation Front of Assam and National Liberation Front of Tripura and National Socialist Council of Nagaland, IM. So these are all different insurgent fronts in different states with different objectives. And in fact, the splinter groups within these main groups and factions, they hinder negotiations and pose a renewal risks of violence in the northeastern part of India. And then we need to talk about the ethnic and identity based conflict in northeast, because there are multiple number of ethnic groups, multiple number of ethnic communities living in northeastern part of India. So therefore, it is very sensitive area. Since multiple number of ethnic groups are living, there's a competing tribal and ethnic community claims. So the claims are for land, autonomy and resources. So they actually strain peace efforts. Example, Manipur's inter-community tensions, they overlap with the broader insurgency dynamics. And then underdevelopment and sense of alienation, it further amplify the grievances. Because in the northeastern part of India, so the majority regions are underdeveloped, underconnected. So there is no connectivity. Most of the areas are underdeveloped, and there is a sense of alienation which is prevalent among the people. So it further increases the grievances of the people, and it further adds the fuel to the insurgent groups to create a disaffection against the nation, right? So for example, Manipur's inter-community tensions among Meiteis and Kuki groups, so it overlaps with the broader insurgency dynamics in the northeastern part of India. And apart from that, we should also talk about the difficult geography, hilly terrain in northeast, because it poses new challenges for the border management or effectively tackling with the insurgency in northeast. Right, we all knew that it shares international borders with a number of other countries, and it also has hilly and difficult terrain. So therefore, it allows the insurgents to slip across safe havens and sustain their logistics. And it is also not easy for the security forces to operate in the hilly and difficult terrain dealing with these insurgent groups. So therefore, the logistical challenges that the security forces have been facing, they hamper the law enforcement in Northeast, surveillance and even the developmental outreach. And then we need to talk about governance, developmental deficits and trust deficit. So we should be talking about weak governance, limited infrastructure and low economic opportunities. So they will create a more space for insurgency. They obviously create more space for the insurgency. And in fact, past broken promises and inadequate rehabilitation, it leads to the distrust between state and former militant or communities. This is another major factor. So there has been a developmental deficit which has been existing, trust deficit which has been existing. The interstate and intrastate boundary and territorial disputes. So dispute between states and within hill plains or regions, it generates instability and complicates the peace process as well. These are some challenges that the security forces have been facing in the northeastern part of India, and you can also write these challenges as general challenges in northeast when it comes to dealing with the insurgent groups. Now let's understand major peace accords and agreements in northeast India in 2014 to 2024 in the last one decade. In the year 2014, in the state of Meghalaya, the accord called ANVC MOS. Now, as part of this agreement in Meghalaya, 751 cadres were surrendered, and it has ended ANVC insurgency in Garo Hills. And in the year 2019, in the state of Tripura, National Liberation Front of Tripura. So, because of this agreement, 88 cadres and 44 arms surrendered, and it has ended the major National Liberation Front of Assam faction violence in the state of Northeast. And in the year 2020, Bodo Peace Accord was signed in the state of Assam, and this Bodo Peace Accord led to 1615 cadres surrendering, and it has created the Bodoland territorial region. And in fact, in the state of Tripura, Bru and Riang agreement was signed in the year 2020. And this Bru and Riang agreement led to the permanent settlement of 37,000 displaced Bru families, and it has also resolved the refugee crisis through this Bru and Riang agreement. Now in 2021, Karbi Anglong agreement was signed. Over 1,000 cadres surrendered, ended decades-old Karbi insurgency, demanding a separate state, demanding a separate nation. Now in 2022, again in Assam, Adivasi Accord was signed. So as part of Adivasi Accord, armed groups from 8 Adivasi or T tribe communities, they surrendered, and it leads to the tribal integration. So therefore, these accords are being signed by the Home Ministry with number of armed insurgent groups. However, the implementation or the success of these accords will depend on all the stakeholders, the government, insurgent groups, people. So the feeling of alienation and the a trust deficit, so that has to be focused by the government. There is a need for increased development in the northeastern part of India. So the needs of all the communities should be recognized, and there is a need for the responsible government in the northeastern part of India. The center and state governments should cooperate and collaborate for the larger development of northeast, because northeast as a region which has a huge potential, and which is also very important for India's policy called Act East policy, where India has been planning to integrate the northeastern part of India with the Southeast Asia. So therefore, in this context, we need to understand the true potential of northeastern part of India, and then we need to work for the success of these peace accords, and we need to bring on board other violent insurgent groups as well. So it will result in permanent peace and development in Northeast. So that's how you need to write the conclusion in this answer. And that's all in this. Thank you so much. Please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like the video. Thank you so much.